Okay, so basically it is also one of the important interview question. So in many interviews, the interviewer asks, what is the difference between static and non-static constructors in C#, right? Now let us study and understand the differences. What are the differences between static and a non-static constructor? Let's see. So the first difference is if a constructor is created by using the static modifier, then we can call it as a static constructor, whereas the rest of all other constructors are called non-static constructor. If you look at this example, right? So this constructor is created using the static modifier, and in this case, we are not using any static modifier. So if so this means it is a static constructor and it is a non-static constructor. Static constructor means it is going to be created using the static modifier, and if static keyword is not used means it's a non-static constructor, right? So this is the first difference you have to say. If the constructor is created by using the static keyword, then we can say it as a static constructor, whereas the rest of all other constructor are non-static only, right? And one more thing is, whenever I'm saying non-static constructor, right, so they are going to, you can also call them as instance constructor, because whenever you are creating an instance, that non-static constructor is going to be invoked only. The static constructor is never going to be invoked whenever you are creating the instance, right? In this case, you can see whenever if I'm looking, see in this case, you are having two example class, two constructor, right? This is one constructor and this is one constructor. And if you look, they both are going to be parameterless. But this is a static constructor and this is a non-static constructor, and both are parameterless. Even though both are parameterless, when I select this,
not audible, sir.
Hello, guys, am I audible to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so who one saying ki not audible? So kindly reconnect. It might be possible that issue on your machine or issue on your network. Just reconnect and you will able to see my voice or listen my voice, right? So in this case, your class having two constructor, two are parameterless, but one is static and one is non-static. So while creating the instance, if you right click and
not
select,
audible, I will rejoin.
Sorry, still not audible. Hello.
No, for us, we are the audible.
Yeah, you are audible for me.
So who is saying that I'm not audible? Okay. So you can see when I'm selecting the constructor and if I'm saying go to definition, then you will see the public non-static constructor is going to be selected, not the static constructor. As so both are having the same signature only, but this is a static and this is non-static. So while creating the instance, the non-static version of the constructor is going to be executed. So we can say the non-static constructor are also instance constructor, because they are going to be invoked while creating the instance of the class. The first point is clear. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now come to the second point. Constructor are responsible for initializing the fields or variable of a class. Static fields or variable are initialized by static constructor, and non-static fields or variable are initialized by non-static. Right? So static constructor is basically used to initialize the static data member of a class. Non-static constructor is basically used to initialize the non-static data member and non-static fields and variable of a class, right? If you look at this example here, we are declaring two variables. One is integer x, static integer x, another is integer y. So this x is going to be a static variable and this y is going to be a non-static variable. As it is a static variable, this variable is going to be initialized by this constructor only. The static constructor is going to initialize the variable x with its default value, that is 0, and this is your non-static constructor. This non-static constructor is going to initialize this non-static variable with the default value, that is 0 in this case. So the point that you need to remember, static variables are going to be initialized by the static constructor and non-static variable are going to be initialized by the non-static constructor. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. Now, point 3. Static constructor are implicitly called, whereas non-static constructor are explicitly called, right? So to understand this, let us see this code. So let me copy the code and put it on the Visual Studio, right? So you can see this class having one static constructor and non-static constructor and having one static block. So static constructor are implicitly called, while the non-static constructor are explicitly called. In this case, right? In this case, I have not invoked the static constructor from anywhere, nor I have invoked it non-static constructor from anywhere, right? But when we run this application, you will see that this code block is going to be executed, and you will see that this statement is printed on the console, right? Let me run this application. This static constructor is called statement should be printed, but the statement that we have written inside this non-static constructor is not going to be printed. What it means? It means static constructor are implicitly called, right? We are not calling the static constructor from anywhere, but that constructor is executed. That constructor is executed means automatically that constructor is called. But non-static constructor we are not calling. But as we are not calling the non-static constructor, that non-static constructor not executed. What it means? Non-static constructor are not implicitly called. They are always going to be called explicitly. Is that clear? Static constructor are always implicitly called, and the non-static constructor are always explicitly called. Is that clear? Guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, but like the static constructor will call only once, and we can call the non-static members how many times we create the instance.
Exactly. Static constructor execute only once, that is when the class execution start. Non-static constructor can be created 0 or n number of times, right? If you are not creating any constructor, in this case, the non-static constructor is not executed, right? And if you are creating the instance n number of times, then the non-static constructor is going to be executed n number of times. For example, so let's say this is object 1 equals to new constructor demo. One time I created, right? 2 times I created, 3 times I created. So I created the object 3 times, means the non-static constructor is going to be invoked now for 3 times. Now run the application and see the output. See, non-static constructor invoked 3 times. Even we created the non-static constructor, even we create the object or instance 3 times, static constructor not going to be invoked 3 times. It is always going to be invoked only 1 time. That is when the class execution starts. Is that clear?
Yes.
Guys?
Yes.
Okay. Now, point 4. Static constructors are executed immediately. If I like to call static constructor, you cannot call static constructor again, right? You cannot. There is Pratik. There is no chance to explicitly call the static constructor, right? So you cannot call the static constructor again. They are implicitly called, right? As a developer, we do not have any control to call the static constructor. That is implicitly. Implicit means we do not have any chance. As we do not have any chance, they are implicitly called. They are only going to be executed only once, right? So there is no chance to call or execute the static constructor explicitly, or there is no chance to execute the static constructor more than once. Static constructors are executed immediately once the execution of a class starts. So what is the role of static constructor? Again, as already we have discussed, the static constructor means they are going to initialize the static data member, right? See, in a class, we have 2 types of a data member, right? In this example, you can see this is a static data member and this is a non-static data member. Static data member means what? Now, suppose you want some variable or you want some value and you want that value to be available throughout the class. You want that value is going to be same for all the instances of the class. Then what you will do? You will declare, if you declare that, see, suppose I know that X value is going to be 100 for all the instances. If I created instance 1, 2, 3, for all the instances, I want this data member value to be 100, right? then what you can do? You can declare that data member as static. If you not declare the data member as static, then what will happen? What will happen? Now, in this case, this variable X is going to be created 100 for all the instances, but for object one copy of this variable is going to be available. For object 2, another copy of this variable is going to be available, which hold the value 100. For object 3, another copy of this X variable is going to be available. See, you want the same value. If you want the same value in all the different instances, then why you are creating 3 different copies? You can create only 1 copy and you can use that copy for all the instances. Then how you can create 1 copy? You can create 1 copy by using the static keyword. So once you make once you make this variable as static, that means it is going to be executed only once, right? This variable memory location will be done only once. But how? Because we need to give some mechanism now. If we are if this initialization will be part of your non-static constructor, means they are going to be allocated, the memory allocation will be done each time you use the new keyword. But we don't want that. So what we want to initialize this memory location only once, right? That is the reason why static constructors are comes into picture. Static constructor will make sure, will give you guarantee that the static variables are going to be executed only once, right? If we have the chance to call the static constructor again and again, that means again and again a new copy of this X variable is going to be also available. But we do not want that. What we want only 1 copy of this X variable throughout the class. This is the reason why they make the static constructor. This is the reason why they make the static constructor called implicitly. This is the reason why they give you guarantee that the static constructor is going to be executed only once, right? As part of the static constructor, as this static constructor is going to be executed only once, right? So if you want to execute some information, some piece of code only once, then you can put that piece of code inside the static constructor, and static constructor will give you guarantee that before executing your class, so this constructor will be executed, and whatever statement, whatever code you have written as part of your static constructor, that is going to be executed. Is that clear? Okay, fine. So now comes to the 4th part. Static constructor execute immediately once the execution of a start, and moreover, it is the first block of code to run under a static class, whereas non-static constructor execute only after creating the first instance, after creating the instance of the class, as well as each and every time the instance of the class is created. So what it means? It means static constructor is the first block of code to be executed inside your class. Already we have seen, right? So this is your constructor, right? Inside, this is your main method, right? This is your main method, this is your program class. So always the application execution starts from the main method. That means when you run your application, the program execution is going to start from this method, right? So in this case, this statement is going to be executed first, right? Creating object of now the construction. Okay, see, this class having 2 data members, static and non-static. This is your static constructor and this is your non-static constructor. So whenever I'm saying once the program, once the class execution start, means once you use this constructor demo for the first time anywhere in your application, the static constructor is going to be executed, right? In this case, the program execution start from the main method, then it will execute this statement. After executing this statement, it is creating an instance of the constructor demo class. So while it is creating the instance of constructor demo class, that means this constructor demo class now using for the first time inside this main method, right? So in this case, what will happen? Now, before executing this constructor demo, this non-static constructor, it will first execute this constructor. After executing this constructor, then it will come and execute this constructor, right? Let us see this practically. Right? See, I put in breakpoint everywhere so that you will get more clarity. Right? See, program execution is always going to be start from the main method, right? After program execution start, say it will execute this statement, and from this constructor demo, right? What I'm pressing F11 because I need to go into the details, right? If you want to execute, if you want to move to the next line, press F10. If you go inside the statement execution, you need to press F11. So I'm printing or I'm selecting F11. See, so once I once I press F11, you can see the static constructor execution happened, not this one. Once this static constructor execution completed, then only the compiler will come and execute this constructor. See, function F11, function F11, static constructor demo execution completed. Then once static constructor completed, then the controller will come to the non-static constructor. That means static constructor is going to be executed for the first time. See, for the first time means that doesn't mean while creating the instance, right? See here, what I'm doing, I'm writing some statement, console dot write line, and what I'm doing, I'm making this variable as public, right? So what I'm doing, constructor demo dot x, right? And what I'm doing here, I'm creating two more instances. So in this case, so we are creating two instances, but before creating instances, we are using this constructor demo class to access the variable x. That means this is the first place where we use the constructor demo. That means the constructor demo class execution not start from here. The class execution will start from here. So before accessing the x variable, it will execute the static constructor, and once it will execute the static constructor, it will initialize this data member, and once it initializes data member, then only the x variable will be accessible. Now let's run the application and see. Right, see. Right, I'm pressing F11. See, once I'm pressing F11, so this x is currently, what is the x value? X value 0, right? Now it is going to execute this statement. After executing, it will come to this place, then this constructor. Now I'm pressing F11, but it is not going inside the static constructor. It is directly coming to the non-static constructor. Why? Because the static constructor is already executed now. And static constructor is executed means it is never going to be executed the static constructor again, right? So the point that you need to remember, static constructor is going to be executed only once. That is when the class execution start for the first time. Class execution start means it is not you are just, whenever you are creating the instance, even whenever you are accessing any member, that means wherever you use the name, the class name for the first time, at that point only the class execution will start, right? And the static constructor once executed, never going to be executed again. And coming to the non-static constructor, you cannot give guarantee how many times it is going to be executed. It might be executed 0 time, 1 time, or n number of time, depending upon the number of objects you created. And the static constructor is basically used to initialize the static variable, and non-static constructor is basically used to initialize the non-static variable. Static variable are going to have only one copy, and non-static variable are going to be n number of copies, where n is nothing but the number of instances you created. Is that clear?
Yeah. So one doubt, like, can't we declare our constructors in program class?
Yes, you can declare. See, this is a different class and this is a different class. You can also, this is your constructor demo class. If you want, you can also declare the constructor here, no issue. So you can declare static public, right? You can declare power static constructor. You can declare public non-static constructor also, right? That is also fine, no issue. So if you write the statement here, so this is your program class constructor. Okay, program class static constructor. See, constructor means it's belong to a class. Program is one class, constructor demo is one class. This constructor demo constructor is going to be execute, this static constructor is going to be execute when you use this constructor demo for the first time. And this is your program class. This is your program class static constructor. So whenever you use the program class for the first time, this static constructor is going to be executed. See, this is the reason why. So whenever you are invoking the static main method, means it's a main method. Compiler will know this is the main method and this is the program class. This invocation, that is program.main method, is done by the compiler. So this is the method. So before executing this method, so it is going to be execute this code block. So let's see. See, so before executing the main method body, the static constructor is going to be executed. So once the static constructor execution done, means all the static members get memory, and then only it will start executing rest of the application. Is that clear?
Yeah, so like I got one confusion here, like within the same class where the main method exists. So in that class, if there is a static constructor, then the static constructor will execute first, then the main method. If the static constructor we defined in another class, then the main method will execute first, and then the static method of another class.
So what is your confusion? I am already pointing out here. First, the main method of the program execution start. Its execution as it is the entry point of your application. Then the static constructor of the constructor demo class is executed. Then the non-static constructor of the constructor demo class is executed. Finally, main method completes its execution in this example, right? So, but what your understanding is absolutely fine. So it's basically depend where the static constructor is placed. If it is placed inside the program class, then before executing the main method, that static constructor is going to be executed, right? And if the static constructor is in another class, so there is no relation. So program class doesn't know who is this constructor demo, right? So the compiler will know only. So this is the main method and this is the program class. So I need to invoke this method. So here it is start executing. So before executing, so it will check, is there any static constructor available inside the program class? Yes, available. Let's execute this. After execution, then only it is going to execute. But in this case, see why it is executing the static constructor before the main method? Because main method invocation is how? If you want to invoke the main method, it's a static block, means you need to write some code like this. So this is the automatically code. Program.main. This statement is there and executed by the compiler. And when this statement is executed, then this method is going to be invoked. But see, this is nothing but your class name, right? That means you are using the class name for the first time. So before executing this main method, it is going to execute this program class, right? This construct. See, in this case, so this is here you are accessing the X variable, right? X variable is a member of this class. But as this is before executing this statement, so it will check, is there any constructor available inside this class which is static? Yes, available. Let's first execute that. Once that execution is done, then it will invoke this, then it will execute this constructor demo.x statement, right? In this case, same thing. So this is program.main class. So it will check, it is a program class. Is there any static constructor inside this program class? Yes, available. Execute that, then execute the main method body, right? So same thing is also. This is constructor demo.x. So constructor demo.x, first it will check, is there any static constructor? Yes, available. Execute that, then execute this one. Clear or not?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Right. Point 5. Static constructors are executed only once, whereas the non-static constructors are executed 0 or n number of times, depending upon the number of instances we created for the class. We have already seen this. So you can create the static you can create n number of a non-static, n number of objects, right? For each object, the static constructor is going to execute once, right? So in this case, we have written the code, and here we are accessing the X variable, right? And inside the class, we have one static constructor and one non-static constructor. As you can see in this example, we have not creating the instance of the class, right? So the non-static constructor is never going to be executed because we are not creating the instance. In this case, what is the execution? First, it will execute this main method started statement. Then before executing this statement, it will execute the constructor available inside this class. Any static constructor available inside this class? Yes, available. It will execute that. So static constructor is called second statement. Then it will print the value of x. What is the default value of x in this case? 0. Then main method completion. This 4 statement you will see in this order, right? Let's run the application and see the output. So you can see main method started first, then static constructor called second, then this statement is executed, which is printing the value 0, then main method completion. In this case, we have not created any instances, right? We have not created any instance. So this non-static constructor is never going to be executed. Now what I'm doing now, we are going to create few instances. See? Now, if you are creating few instances, I'm creating 2 instances. So 2 times the non-static constructor is going to be executed. See, main method started, static constructor is called. So 3 instances I'm creating. So this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. So 3 times the non-static constructor is called. But before, this is the first time I'm using the constructor demo, right? So first time using this class. So before executing the non-static constructor, it will check, is there any static constructor? Is that static constructor executed? No, there is a static constructor, but that not executed. Let's execute first. So it will execute the static constructor, then it will execute the non-static constructor. Now the compiler come to this place. Again, it will check, is there any static constructor? Yes, static constructor. Is that static constructor executed? Yes, that is executed. Then don't execute that. Execute the non-static constructor. So this is the way static and non-static constructors are going to be executed. Is that clear? Guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Then when the static constructor of a class is executed, so few people are having that doubt. Sir, when the static constructor is going to be executed, it is very important to understand when the static constructor is going to be executed implicitly, right? If both the static constructor and main method are present in a single class, then the program execution will start from the main method. But before executing the main method body, it will first execute the static constructor of the class. We have already seen this. When we call any static variables or static method for the first time in a class, then it will execute the static constructor. We have already seen this. When we create an instance of a class for the first time, then before executing the non-static constructor, it will first execute the static constructor of that class. So these are the 3 different scenarios where the static constructor is going to be executed. But the most important point that you need to remember is static constructors are executed only once, irrespective of number of times you called the static variable or static method, or irrespective of the number of times you created the instance of the class. Is that clear?
Yes.
Any doubt?
No.
In the life cycle of a class, the life cycle in the sense when we start the execution to the end of the execution, it is considered as one life cycle. In the life cycle of a class, the static constructor is executed only once, whereas the non-static constructor is executed 0 times if no instances are created, and n times if n number of instances are created. We have already discussed this. Okay. Now let's come to the next point. Non-static constructor can be parameterized, whereas the static constructor cannot have any parameters, right? The non-static constructor, you can see here, non-static constructor. I can create the non-static constructor with 1 parameter, but you cannot create the static constructor with parameter. See, if I'm passing some parameter, what he is saying, constructor demo, a static constructor must be parameter. So you cannot pass parameter to the static constructor. Why we cannot pass parameter? Because
Cannot create the object.
No, cannot create the object. Not that is not the thing, because static constructor are executed implicitly or explicitly.
Implicitly.
Implicitly means as a user, do you have any chance to pass any value?
No.
That is the reason why they are not taking any parameter. But the non-static constructor, right, Can we call this constructor explicitly, or how these non-static constructors are executed, implicitly or explicitly?
Explicitly.
If explicitly means we have the chance
Great.
to pass the parameter, right? This is the reason why non-static constructor are parameterized, but static constructor can never be parameterized. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's do the next one. Non-static constructor can be overloaded, whereas static constructor cannot be overloaded, right? So overloading, overloading is one important concept that we will discuss. But for now, overloading means the method name is going to be same, but the number, type, and order of parameters are going to be different. So whenever we define the same method with different number, type, and order of a parameter inside a class or inside the parent and child classes, then those methods are said to be overloading methods. In this case, you can see this is a non-static constructor which is taking 0 parameter. This is a non-static constructor which is taking 1 parameter. This is a non-static constructor which is taking parameter. This is a static constructor. This is 0 parameter. This is another static constructor. You cannot pass parameter to a static constructor. That we already discussed. So as we cannot pass parameter to a static constructor, what it means, a static constructor can never be overloaded. Overloading is one of the important topic of polymorphism. We will discuss that in detail, but for now you just need to remember that non-static constructor can be overloaded, means we can define the non-static constructor with different parameters, but static constructor cannot be overloaded. There is only one and only static constructor which is parameterless. You cannot define more than one static constructor by taking different number of parameters. One constructor, that is parameterless, 0 parameter. Is that clear? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Every class contains an implicit constructor. See, whenever you are creating a class, so every class contains an implicit constructor if not defined explicitly, right? And those implicit constructors defined based on the following criteria. See, whether you create a static class or whether you create a non-static class, every class means there is some constructor, right? As a developer, if we are not providing any constructor implicitly means the explicitly means the compiler will provide the implicit constructor. Then, but while based on some condition or based on some criteria, the compiler will provide the implicit constructor. First of all, as a developer, we are not defining any constructor. Then only the implicit constructor concept comes to picture. Then at what scenario the compiler will provide what type of implicit constructor, that we need to understand. Every class except a static class contains an implicit non-static constructor if not defined with an explicit constructor. Suppose you are creating a non-static class. That means if it is not a static class, mandatorily one constructor will be there. If as a developer we are not providing any constructor implicitly, then explicitly, then compiler will provide an implicitly constructor. Second, static constructor are implicitly defined only if that class contains any static. See, if your class in the sense, if you are defining a class and if that class contains some static data members, then static constructor will be provided by the compiler, right? If the constructor will not present, right? But the thing is that if your class doesn't have any static data member, then compiler will not provide you the static. We already seen this thing in our previous session. We have seen this when the static constructor is provided by the compiler, how we can check the static constructor using ILDSM tool. If anybody have any issue, then they can see our previous video. There we have already discussed this, right? When the compiler will provide the static constructor, when the compiler will provide the non-static constructor. We have seen example using static variable and without using static variable. If we are using a static variable, compiler will provide the constructor. If we are not using the static variable, then compiler will not provide the static constructor, right? Now summary. So now you can see what is the summary, what we have discussed as of now. You can give a summary. A constructor is a special method inside a class used to initialize the data member. If we create the constructor using static modifier, then we call it as a static constructor, and rest of all are non-static constructor only. The static constructor is used to initialize the static data member. And non-static constructor is used to initialize the non-static data members of a class. Static constructor is always invoked implicitly, while the non-static constructor is always invoked explicitly. If we have not defined any constructor explicitly, then compiler will provide the implicitly constructor in the following condition. For a static class, the compiler will provide a static constructor implicitly, but no non-static constructor. For a non-static class, the compiler will provide a static constructor. If the non-static class having any static member, then only the compiler will provide the static constructor. Static constructor will execute only once during the life cycle of a class, and the non-static constructors are executed 0 or n number of times. If we have not created any object, then constructor will execute 0 times. If we have created n number of objects, then the constructor will execute n number of times. Right?
One doubt actually. Sorry.
Sorry.
If we can go to the fourth point and A in that, like I got confused. Like if we have a class, if we have a static class, then even though if there are no static members, by default the compiler will provide a static constructor.
See, if a class is a static class, right, then there is no chance of defining any non-static member. In a static class means all the members are going to be by default static.
Okay.
Right? There is no chance of a non-static member. For example,
But
okay, for example, if you create a static class, public, right, public, static, some example class we can consider, right? So some example class. So why I'm getting error? Okay. Okay. See, integer x equals to 10. So as soon as I write integer x equals to 10, I'm getting one error. What error I'm getting? Cannot declare instance member in a static class. So there is no concept of instance thing inside a static class. But if I make like this static integer y equals to 10, then you will not get any error. That means there is no chance of a non-static constructor in a static class. Is that clear?
Okay, so the members of static class should be static,
Static.
whether
There
they're
is no concept of
variables or
non-static.
methods.
It's a variable or method, no issue. Suppose you are creating void some method, right? Void some method. So if you are creating a variable of like this, again you will get some error. So what error? Cannot declare instance method. So void static. If you declare, if you make this a static, then the error will become. That means it's not possible to declare any static member inside a static class. As there is no chance of non-static members, then there is no chance of creating an instance, right? So if you try to create an instance of this class, then also you will get some error, right? You cannot create an instance of a static class. See, we have some example. So I'm trying to create an example class instance. So you can see you will get some error. You cannot create an instance of static class because there is no static member. Na? As there is no static member, then what is the need of creating an instance? No need. That is the reason why they are not allowing to create an instance of the static class. Static class means only static, right? So we'll discuss this thing again in detail, static classes in our coming session. If you look at our syllabus, then you will see that static class concept is there. So if you go to the OOPS concept, static class. We are going to cover the static class in detail. What are the things you can do with static class? What are the things you cannot do with the static class? Everything we are going to discuss. What is the difference between a static class and a non-static class, static member and a non-static member, static method and a non-static? Everything we are going to discuss, right? Is that clear as of now?
Yeah.
Okay, the fourth point is clear now?
Yes.
Right? For a non-static class, the compiler will provide a non-static. If the non-static class having any static member, right? For a static class, the compiler will provide a static constructor implicitly, but no non-static constructor. Why no non-static constructor? Now you got the clarity, because there is no non-static member. Yes. Okay. Now 6 point. In a class, we can have only one static constructor, that is 2 parameters less, and hence static constructor cannot be overloaded, right? You cannot define a 2 static constructor. There is only one static constructor, that is 2 parameters less. But in a class, we can define any number of a non-static constructor. You can see, we can define any number of a non-static constructor. This is one non-static constructor. I can declare another non-static constructor which is taking 1 parameter. I can declare another non-static constructor which is taking 2 parameters, right? So these are accessible, but you cannot define 2 static constructors. So this is one static constructor, and if I try to define another static constructor with some parameter, then I will get some, because static constructor is always going to be parameterless. Parameterless means this is the only applicable, and you cannot define the 2 constructor with the same signature. You cannot define, so because these 2 are going to be same signature is not applicable inside a class. So you will not, you can define like this, right? So static constructor is always going to be parameterless, and hence it cannot be overloaded, right? The last one, static constructor is executed when our class execution start, and it will execute only once, and it will be the first block inside a class to be executed, while the non-static constructors are going to be executed when we create an instance of a class and for each instance of the class, right?